Sarah Blackwood smoothed her crisp navy suit as she strode through the airport terminal, her heels clicking purposefully on the polished floor. She had clawed her way to the top of Megacorp's executive ranks through sheer determination and ruthless ambition. The red-eye to Tokyo was just another step on her relentless climb. As she settled into her first-class seat, Sarah's steel-gray eyes scanned the cabin, assessing potential threats out of habit. Old habits died hard for someone who had grown up dodging her alcoholic father's drunken rages. Her gaze lingered on a man in a dark suit a few rows back. Something about his intense stare made the hairs on the back of her neck prickle. Sarah shook off the feeling of unease. She had more important things to focus on, like the incriminating documents tucked safely in her briefcase that would bring down half the Megacorp board. A thin smile curved her lips. By this time tomorrow, she'd be the new CEO. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Sarah closed her eyes, willing herself to relax. But sleep refused to come. Every time she started to drift off, she jolted awake, heart racing. The cabin felt oppressively small, the recycled air thick and stale. Sarah's eyes snapped open as something brushed against her arm. She looked down to see a folded piece of paper on her armrest. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. "I know what you're planning. You won't make it to Tokyo alive." Ice flooded Sarah's veins. She whipped her head around, searching for the note's source. The cabin was dim and quiet, most passengers dozing. Only the man in the dark suit was awake, watching her with cold, predatory eyes. Sarah's mind raced. How had they found out? She'd been so careful. Unless... A chill ran through her as realization dawned. They'd known all along. This whole trip was a trap. She took a deep, steadying breath. No time for panic. She needed a plan. Sarah stood abruptly, mumbling an excuse as she squeezed past the sleeping woman next to her. She hurried to the lavatory, locking herself inside the cramped space. Her reflection in the mirror looked pale and haunted. "Get it together," she hissed at herself. "You've survived worse than this." Flashes of memory assaulted her, hiding in closets as a child while her father raged, the bitter taste of fear as she ran from her abusive ex-husband. She'd clawed her way out of hell once. She could do it again. Sarah splashed cold water on her face, steeling herself for what was to come. As she reached for a paper towel, she noticed something protruding from the waste bin. Her stomach lurched as she realized what it was. A severed human finger, the nail painted a familiar shade of coral pink. Sarah stumbled back, choking down bile. It was Lisa's finger, her assistant who was supposed to be on this flight. Oh God, what had they done to her? A knock at the door made Sarah jump. "Everything all right in there?" a male voice called, the man from the dark suit. Fine, Sarah managed to stammer. Just a moment. Her mind raced. She was trapped in a metal tube hurtling through the sky with a ruthless killer, and based on Lisa's grisly fate, he had no qualms about disposing of anyone who got in his way. Sarah's eyes darted around the tiny bathroom, desperately searching for anything she could use as a weapon. Her gaze fell on the metal trash can. It would have to do. Taking a deep breath, Sarah flushed the toilet and opened the door. The man's eyes glittered with malice as he smiled at her. Feeling better? Without warning, Sarah swung the trash can with all her might, catching him in the side of the head. He stumbled back with a grunt of pain and surprise. Sarah shoved past him, sprinting down the aisle. "Help!" she screamed. "Someone help me!" But the other passengers remained motionless, heads lolling unnaturally. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the horrible truth. They were all dead. A hand grabbed her arm, yanking her backwards. Sarah spun, lashing out wildly. Her nails raked across the man's face, drawing blood. He snarled, backhanding her hard enough to make her see stars. Sarah stumbled, falling into a row of seats. The man loomed over her, a cruel smile twisting his lips. Now, he chided. Is that any way to treat an old friend? Sarah blinked in confusion, her vision swimming. As her eyes focused, recognition dawned. "Marcus?" she gasped. It was impossible. Marcus had been her mentor at Megacorp, the closest thing to a father figure she'd ever had, until the day she discovered his involvement in human trafficking and turned him in. He'd gone to prison swearing revenge. "Surprise," Marcus sneered. "Did you really think a few years in prison would stop me? I have powerful friends, Sarah. Friends who were more than happy to arrange this little reunion." Sarah's mind reeled. How many people on the board were in on this? How deep did the corruption go? "Why?" she managed to choke out. "Why go to all this trouble?" Marcus's eyes glittered with hatred. "You took everything from me. My career, my reputation, my freedom. Now I'm going to take everything from you, starting with your life." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a wickedly sharp hunting knife. Sarah's eyes widened in terror. She tried to scramble away, but Marcus grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. "I'm going to enjoy this," he hissed, bringing the blade to her throat. In that moment, something inside Sarah snapped. All the fear and rage she'd suppressed for years came roaring to the surface. With a feral scream, she drove her knee up between Marcus's legs. He doubled over with a strangled gasp. Sarah seized the opportunity, grabbing a nearby oxygen mask and wrapping the cord around his neck. Marcus clawed at the cord, his face turning purple as he struggled for air. "This is for Lisa," Sarah snarled, tightening her grip. "And for every other innocent person you've hurt." Marcus's eyes bulged as he gasped for air. Just as his struggles began to weaken, the plane gave a violent lurch. Sarah lost her balance, tumbling to the floor. Marcus collapsed beside her, coughing and wheezing. Alarms blared as the oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. The plane pitched sideways, sending loose items flying. Sarah's head smacked against an armrest, leaving her dazed. Through blurry vision, she saw Marcus staggering to his feet, murder in his eyes. Sarah scrambled backwards, her hand closing around something solid. The fire extinguisher. As Marcus lunged for her, Sarah swung the extinguisher with all her might. There was a sickening crunch as it connected with his skull. Marcus crumpled to the floor, blood pooling beneath him. Sarah stared at his motionless form, her chest heaving. Was it over? Had she won? A chilling laugh cut through the chaos. Sarah's blood ran cold as a figure emerged from the cockpit. It was Johnson, the head of Megacorp's board. "I have to hand it to you, Sarah," he said, slow clapping. "You're even more resourceful than we gave you credit for. It's almost a shame to kill you." Sarah's mind raced. If Johnson was here, that meant... "The pilots?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Johnson's smile was cold. "Unfortunate casualties, but necessary to ensure our privacy." Sarah glanced at the other passengers, remembering their unnatural stillness. "And them?" "Sleeping gas in the air filtration system," Johnson explained casually. "They'll never wake up, unlike you, my dear. I want you fully aware for what comes next." He pulled out a gun, aiming it at Sarah's head. "You have two choices. Take that parachute and disappear forever, or come back with me and face a fate far worse than death. Your call." Sarah's eyes darted to the emergency exit. Could she really jump? But the alternative? Images flashed through her mind. Lisa's severed finger, Marcus's cruel smile, all the innocents who had suffered at Megacorp's hands. She thought of her own painful past, all the times she'd run and hidden. No more. Sarah's jaw clenched with determination. "Go to hell!" she spat. In one fluid motion, she snatched up Marcus's fallen knife and hurled it at Johnson. It embedded in his shoulder, causing him to cry out in pain and surprise. The gun clattered to the floor. Sarah lunged for it, her fingers closing around the grip. She rolled, coming up in a crouch with the weapon aimed at Johnson's head. "It's over," she said, her voice steady. You've lost." Johnson's eyes narrowed. "You think this changes anything? You'll never be able to prove what we've done. And even if you could, do you really think the authorities aren't in our pocket too? Face it, Sarah. You can't win." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy. One bullet and it would all be over. She could disappear, start a new life far away from all of this. But as she stared into Johnson's cold, remorseless eyes, Sarah knew she couldn't walk away. Not when there were still people suffering, still injustices to be righted. "You're wrong," she said softly. "I've already won. Because unlike you, I still have my humanity." With that, Sarah turned and sprinted for the cockpit. She slammed the door shut, barricading it with a food cart. Her hands flew over the controls, desperately trying to regain control of the plummeting aircraft. As the plane leveled out, Sarah grabbed the radio. "Mayday, Mayday," she called. "This is Flight 237. Our pilots are dead, and there are armed hostiles on board. Request immediate assistance." She rattled off their coordinates, praying help would arrive in time. Outside the cockpit, she could hear Johnson shouting and pounding on the door. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She didn't know if she'd survive the landing or what would happen if she did. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't running. She was standing her ground, fighting for what was right. As the horizon came into view, Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. Whatever happened next, Megacorp's days were numbered. The truth would come out, one way or another, and Sarah would make damn sure she lived long enough to see it happen.